All right, here we go. We are live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to have Dean Wesley Smith on the show with us. I was just talking with Dean before we went live, and this is a connection that I have wanted to make for quite some time. And you have heard Dean's name come up over and over again in this podcast over the years. And he is one of the most prolific authors working today. He has worked in just about every series that you know and love, and is cranking out work of his own on a daily basis. Dean is he's considered one of the most prolific writers working in modern fiction, USA Today bestselling writer, and you've been on the New York Times bestseller list also. And you've published under a plethora of pen names through the years, and as something that I want to talk to you about today. All that out of the way, Dean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And welcome, Ginger. Welcome, B. Welcome, Sarah. Everyone for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in. Dean, a question that I love to ask people to kind of set the tone for the conversation and get things going. Okay. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, I never wanted to be a writer.
Really?
Ever. No, I'm one of those weird exceptions to that one.
Yeah.
In fact, growing up, I hated things like, in school, essay questions. Oh, I would avoid those like everything I could do to avoid them. I was an athlete. I was a professional skier in the early days of what's now called freestyle.
Okay.
Back then it was called hot dogging.
Yeah.
And I was in the first couple of things of hot dogging and as a skier. And then I became a PGA professional. I was a trunk slammer on the tour, was a head pro at a golf course in Palm Springs, head professional, and that sort of stuff. So when I decided to go back to college after a whole bunch of years of doing that, the thought of writing anything was just an alien concept. I couldn't spell, I couldn't type, I had nothing. And I got into a class that was I was an architecture major because I was going to go design golf courses. Made sense. I was a professional golfer, and so I have a master's degree in architecture. And I also went to 3 years of law school. Yeah, I got a little carried away with going to school.
Does.
Yeah. And so the reality is that it was that first year, 1974, I took a poetry for non-majors class.
Yeah.
And this instructor, bless her heart, made us mail out some poems to a college poetry contest for poets in college around the country, and I won the stupid thing, which in the class my poetry was hated because I was way too flippant and commercial, and I didn't care because I was over in architecture department. I didn't care about this stupid credit in English, and so I started dinging around with poetry, and then wrote a couple real short stories. First draft on a typewriter, a lot of whiteout to fix the mistakes, and not because I couldn't type. So I'm doing this,
right?
And
unpack,
which is basically still how I write.
Yeah.
And although I tend to get more than 2 fingers in it now, but I sold them both to a professional science fiction magazine. Didn't realize all the things I'd done right.
Right.
I'd written one draft, mailed them, and that was it. And of course, that's when I first started thinking about writing. Was when I sold those first 2 short stories, and then there were some dry spells between there and actually getting going.
Yeah, there's not a better recruiting plan than success, is there?
Yeah. Well, and it just never occurred to me. But I was a reader. I've always been a hardcore reader of mystery and science fiction and fantasy. Hardcore. Right. I grew up Andre Norton and Edgar Rice Burroughs,
Sure.
They saved my life back in the 50s when I was younger.
Well, over the last, I guess it's been 12, almost 13 years, I've been podcasting about writers and books, and interviewed over 2,000 writers in that
Wow.
period of time.
Wow.
An interesting thing that I have found is that I can count on one hand, possibly on a second hand, a couple of fingers,
Mhm.
the amount of writers out of that 2,000 who have had the sole purpose of wanting to become a published writer, and everything that they have done has led to that point. And there's been a couple of folks that their dream was to get an MFA, and then while getting an MFA, they're submitting stories, and that's the only thing they ever did. On one hand, Dane, I mean, that's so rare. The vast, overwhelming majority of people go out and they collect some life experience from an architecture program and a PGA pro and a hot dog skier. And you actually tell a story about the hot dogging in your book, Riding into the Dark. And I was just reading that last night, and you were talking about overcoming fear and how one of your buddies with you, he got the photo in the magazine because he didn't let fear stop him. And, you use that as a metaphor for writing. But the vast majority of people depend on all of the tools for their writer toolkit that they pick up from doing this and doing that. And writers are not typically people that only think about writing.
Oh, heavens no. Yeah. Yeah, we have, I still to this, well, not so much at the moment, because, when you get up into your mid 70s, you tend to slow down some of the things you did. But,
Don't hot dog as much.
Yeah, no, I was always a collector. I'm hitting golf balls again, even after I smashed up my shoulder running a 5K, which I thought was really fascinating because I did that when I was 74. And, and everybody in the hospital thought I'd broken my shoulder by reaching for the remote. Just like, no, I was up with the leaders of a 5K run and didn't see a curb because of the bad eyes and tripped and went down. And I tried to roll into it like I did as an old skier, but didn't quite make with the roll. So I smashed the shoulder. I got titanium all through here, which made writing a little difficult for a little while. But you're always doing something. That's a lot of the writers I know are always professional long-term writers. They're always doing something.
Yeah.
And it's the nature of the as my wife called it. My wife is Kristine Kathryn Rusch, the writer, and she calls herself, she has a hummingbird brain. She can't run any longer than a 5K because she gets bored. I'm going to be doing a half marathon here this weekend, and so I'll be walking most of it, but I'm still going to finish it. And that's the kind of stuff
forward momentum.
More like try not to fall down as I'm leaning forward. Just keep going.
Yeah. Well, that's where the momentum part comes in, I guess.
Yeah.
A little context here. Next month in March, we are doing a short story challenge where we've got a community of writers, and we're going to be writing some short stories together, and we're going to kind of go through the steps of writing a short story. And I was talking with some folks in our community and talking about how much I love the form of the short story, and how I believe that being a better short story writer will make you a better novelist.
Sure.
And I know you got started writing short stories, and at the time in the early 70s, I was born in 71. So I guess I was about 3 when you sold your first short story.
50 years ago now. So I'm just telling your age now.
Right. Exactly. But one, I still love the form of the short story. And I know 50 years ago, the market for short stories in particular, and publishing in general, was a wildly, vastly different place.
Sure.
The love of short story is one thing, but the commercial viability of short stories. How do you feel like the market looks at short stories today? And do you agree with me that being a better short story writer will make you a better novelist?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the nice thing about short stories is you get to finish them quickly.
Right.
You know, where
And I
novels,
think that's one of the most important things is that
oh, yeah,
teaching someone that they can get through a thing,
yeah,
say getting to the end is a
yeah.
magnificent thing for your for your writer credibility, even within yourself, just knowing that you can finish something.
Heinlein's rule number two: you must finish everything. You must
Right.
write is number one, and number two, you must finish everything you write.
Right.
And that's the absolute, because you really can destroy your creative voice if you keep stopping in the middle of stories and starting something else.
Yeah.
That makes the creative voice. Creative voice is like a little 2-year-old in the back of your head.
Mhm.
And basically what will happen is if you say, oh, this story isn't worth anything, and your creative voice knew where it was going and what it was going to do, but the stupid part of your brain, the front part of your brain says, oh no, this is awful, and you stop. Then basically what occurs is you chase that creative voice away, and pretty soon it just doesn't come back. Or it takes a lot of work for it to come back. And so it's what I equate it to is you must finish everything you write. That's rule number two of Heinlein's. And the reality is if you do that, then your creative voice will come and play more often. And so it's really important that you finish. But yeah, short stories are absolutely wonderful things to do. I mean, I'm certainly a proponent of that right now. I have a challenge going on. I guess you probably have heard about that. I'm doing a short story a day. I'm going to try to do it for the entire year. We shall see. Of course, that has issues on the publishing side.
Yeah.
But right now, the viability of short stories is better than it's ever been since the pulp era. Since back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, when short stories were everywhere, thousands and thousands of pulps. So, in fact, I'm going to change out these whiteboards up here with pulp covers. And I can even show you one. I got a couple of them right here of old pulp covers that were blown up, and I'm going to put them on the wall. Like there's Spicy Detective. That's a pulp you probably never heard of. There were thousands and thousands of pulps back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and into the early 50s. The war took a lot of that out, but because of the paper shortages. But right now, because of the indie movement and everything else, there are more markets, professional markets for short stories than there have been in my lifetime since the 70s. Yeah. And also you can do what you want. You can publish them as much as you want. I'm going to be doing these stories I'm doing a day. They're going to be in 10-story collections. I'm going to revive my magazine. I had until I dinged with my eyes and then my shoulder. I had a monthly magazine publishing only my work. Here's the last issue.
Smith's.
Called Smith's Monthly. And see, it's got 70,000 words of fiction in it. That's just me. There's nobody else in it. And I did see that big, that's 67 issues right there. And so that is see why I'm considered prolific. I published 800-900 books now. A couple hundred of those were novels, and then all the other stuff I've edited and everything else that been together. I went by Asimov's 600 or 700 4 or 5 years ago, and haven't looked back. So that's the kind of thing that short stories make possible. Right. To answer your question directly, it's absolutely wonderful. I love writing them. I've always loved writing them. I've done 600, 700, 800 of them now, and never get tired of it.
How would someone find viable places to publish short stories these days?
Oh, there's lots of places. There's entire magazines and websites that do market reports, and they're everywhere, and they're popping up all the time. My suggestion is how you judge if it's a good market is if they pay you up front. And you have a contract, and they pay you up front, and for more than 4 cents a word is a professional level. And so, I mean, I have my own magazine that we publish at WMG called Pulp House. It is not open for submissions, but if you support the Kickstarter that we do as a subscription drive every year, then I open it to backers of the subscription drive. And so, and right now I'm behind reading because I got way behind this fall. And so I have quite a few short stories to read, but it allows me to find new writers as an editor. I published 1 or 2 new stories to every issue, and it's a monthly magazine. Pulp House won it was up for the Hugo 3 or 4 times, and it's been around for a long time. We started Pulp House in '91, I think.
Okay. Yeah, what do you consider the length for short stories? Is there
7,000 words?
How many?
7,000 words.
Okay. All right.
Under 7,000 words. If you get much under 1,000 words or down and around 1,000 or less, then you get into the flash fiction, short. It's very difficult to do an actual short story at 1,000 words. Some people may disagree with me instantaneously on that, but flash fiction isn't really short stories. Short stories are 1,000, 1,500 words to 7,000. You get over 7,000 and you're in what's called novelette land.
Right.
And that goes to 15,000. And then from 15,000 words to 30,000 words is novella land. And then over 30, you're in short novel, and basically 35 to 40,000 words, you're in full novel. And, and so it's a really interesting way of marketing. It's a marketing thing.
Sure.
Novellas stand alone. If you can get anything over 15,000 words, you can make that as a standalone book.
Yeah.
And so that's really good in the modern indie world of publishing, is having these standalone books.
Yeah. We had a question just a minute ago from Dawn King, and I'm going to pop it up on the screen here. She said, Dean, if you were starting your writing career today, what would be your first step? And I want to tag onto her question because I heard you saying a while back, I forget, it was one of the 20 books to 50K talks that you had done, possibly. But you were saying that when you started, the market was very different than it is now, and that indie publishing has opened up the possibilities in a way that you don't even consider traditional publishing in the same way that you did 50 years ago, obviously.
Oh, heavens no.
So to answer Don's question, if you were starting over today, never published anything, what would you do? And I'll just tag onto that and say, would you consider traditional publishing? Would you go straight to indie? How do you kind of feel?
Oh, this is 2025. There is no traditional publishing anymore. Traditional publishing now, there's 4 companies left. When I came in, there were over 1,000. Okay. And so, but there's 4 companies left. Everybody's bought up everybody. And those 4 companies are owned by big conglomerates. And mostly they're really good for celebrity nonfiction, things like that, political books. For fiction, there's 5 or 10 authors, maybe 20, that are still holding on there, that had big, James Patterson, Dean Koontz, Nora Roberts, the gang up top. And they're just there. They're going to age out. Most of them a lot of them have started to age out. Cussler's dead, things like that. They're aging. And that's going away. There's almost nobody new coming in. I think Hoover came in and got lucky, started indie, went traditional, and then got really hit it with her books. But otherwise, there's nothing there for fiction writers anymore at all. It's a scam. New York agents are scams. Licensing agents are not, but they're over in the licensing expo and in the licensing world. Hollywood agents are scams. So you got to be really careful of that. New York agents are scams. And so you just stay the hell away. This is 2025. The new world of publishing. Well, I suppose I could back up. If you give me 1 second here, I can give you some history.
We're here to hear you
Every
So
50 years,
yeah, we're here for your wisdom, Dean. Lay it on us.
every 50 years, publishing changes. The
Okay.
distribution system changes, and what the writers need to do changes.
Okay.
In the 1800s, from the Civil War in the United States up to about 1905, 1910, it
Okay.
was the penny dreadfuls and all that. Then
Right.
it was the pulp era for 50 years. And then it was the paperback era, mass market paperback era.
Mhm.
That's what you call traditional publishing.
Sure.
And I call traditional publishing. Okay. And then with the advent of the Kindle, even though there were 15 years of electronic books, I mean, I was on the top of the electronic bestseller list in the year 2000 with a book called Belly of the Beast. It was a Star Trek book.
When people were publishing PDFs.
No, it was rocket books.
Ah,
There were a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah.
before the Kindles.
Yeah.
Whole bunch. But the Kindle actually caused the changeover to the electronic book distribution system. So we went from penny dreadfuls to pulps to mass market. Now we're in the electronic world. The electronic world is controlled by the indie writers. In traditional publishing, we had no control. Nothing. They told us everything. We had contracts. We had to hit the contracts. We had editors. We had the agents. We had all the stupidity in the middle, and all these gatekeepers and all that. Now in the indie world, we can write what we want, and do exactly what we want. So what I would suggest to answer your question is learn how to publish your own books. Learn how to be a publisher as well as. It is not hard. It seems overwhelming at the start. I will grant you that, but it is not difficult at all. You just basically learn how to format your books, which is Vellum. That's an easy program. And then learn how to do your own covers. Do not hire covers at the beginning because you can't afford it. You won't be making any money. And then get your stories out, publish them standalone, start with short stories, publish them standalone. Every one of my short stories will be because of issues with our publishing company. We own our own publishing company, WMG Publishing. And we also own a media company, which is called Pulp House Media, Inc. And, but the idea, we got a little behind with publishing standalone short stories. There are, in that magazine right there, in Smith's Monthly, there are over 300 original short stories, and about 180 of them are published standalone right now. And so the others need to get published standalone, and not counting all the others that I'm doing and have done and aren't out. But they all make money. We publish them. We sell them for $1.99 electronic. Some of them we even put in paperback, standalone paperback, sell them for $4.99. That's how you start. And then you work yourself up to novels. And that's how you do it. But you got to learn the new world of writing. In the old world of writing, you had to learn how to get your stuff to a traditional publisher through that gauntlet.
Yeah.
Well, that gauntlet doesn't exist anymore. It's dead. Now you have to learn how to get it to Amazon and the other places, and how to do your own covers and how to format it and get it out, and then write the next thing and become a better writer. The biggest thing that people forget early on is you got to keep studying craft. You have to keep studying to become a better storyteller. And that's what I'd suggest. Work like crazy to become a better storyteller, and finish everything and put it on the market. Rule number 4 of Heinlein's rules: put it on the market.
Yep.
Put it on the market.
Yep. The form of the short story versus the form of the novel. When I think of a short story versus novel, I think short story is a limited. I think of it kind of in the same way.
Explain it to you.
Please.
Here's how it works.
Okay.
You have in English departments and all that stuff, you have what's called an opening. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at the 7-point story plot outline, 7 points. That's all it is. It doesn't matter whether it's a novel or a short story. 7 points.
Okay.
Point number 1 is you have a character. Point number 2, character's in a setting. And point number 3, the character has a problem. doesn't have to be the problem of the whole thing, but there's some sort of something going on.
Sure.
You know, can't tie his shoes. That's the opening. 1, 2, and 3. Character in a setting with a problem. That's an opening. Okay. Point 4 is the character tries to solve the problem. And point 5, the character fails. It's called a try-fail sequence. And if the character succeeds, things get worse by the success. So what you're looking at anytime you're writing is, and this is something that early stage writers don't do, is they don't beat on their characters severely. Yeah. They go, oh, my character has a problem. Okay, I solved it. The end. And that's not a satisfying story. The character has to try and fail. Okay. Then point 6 is the climax of whether the character is the final last try and they succeed. And if they don't succeed, it's called a tragedy. If they do succeed, it's called a comedy in the old sense of those two words. And then the final point 7 is the validation, which is the ending, usually after a time jump. And if it's a short story, it's usually 300-400 words. If it's a novel, it's sometimes a couple chapters. This validation is let's wrap up everything here and tell the readers they can leave the book. And so that's 7-point plot outline. Character in a setting with a problem. That's your opening. Try, fail. That's your center. Climax. That's number 6. And number 7 is the validation. What's the difference between a short story and a novel? A short story has one try-fail. A novel has a whole mess of try-fails. And the longer the novel gets, the more try-fails there are. Yeah. And it's just that simple. Just try, fail, things get worse. Try, fail, things get worse. Try, fail. Oh, things get better, but no, really, they got worse. Yeah. And that's a novel. And that's the only difference right there.
When you talked a minute ago about that try-fail cycle and how new authors are almost scared to be belligerent to their characters. One of the big problems I see with new authors is they're too in love with their characters. They hold them in too high a regard. They're scared to be horrible to them. But a good writer needs to be ruthless with their characters. So my wife and I have a kind of a running joke that when we're watching a TV show or a movie or something, we're like, okay, you create a character that readers or viewers are going to love, and then you stick them in a tree, and then you set that tree on fire. And you do that over and over again. And
Chris and I do this thing called Chris and Dean Show. We used to do it out at conventions back in the 90s. And it was, the idea was, we wish someone would have told us this stuff before we started. But we did, the ending was, when people would say, well, talk to us about craft. And we'd say, well, okay, So what we used was Die Hard, the movie, the Christmas movie, Die Hard.
The Christmas movie, right.
Yeah. And basically we would stand there and start through Die Hard and stop it continuously to show the craft in Die Hard. Die Hard's almost a perfect movie. It's a thriller, that sort of stuff. We just also did, the Chris and Dean Show does Back to the Future, which is also a perfect movie, but it's not a thriller. It's a regular kind of science fiction adventure movie, sort of a character movie. And so we do these all the time. I mean, you go to my website at deanwesleysmith.com and you can get links to a lot of this stuff. Go back through some of the other blogs. I blog every day, and I put something up there every day. Sometimes it's about workshops or about different things that are going on. And we do this Chris and Dean Show now. We actually brought it into the modern world, and
love it.
Die Hard, we did. It's about 3 or 4 hours of videos. And,
wow.
And then we also did Back to the Future. It just came live.
Oh, that's awesome.
You want to learn a lot about craft and story structure, just watch those two things.
We alluded to, I showed this book a minute ago, Writing into the Dark, that I've studied of yours for a number of years, and you've done some workshops on it, and we've alluded to it a little bit here. You talked about the 7-point plot structure, and but in Writing into the Dark, you talk about not plotting. Is the structure in your mind? Does story just naturally come out in that structure because you're so well versed in it,
No,
and it's just
no, it's
kind of
everybody has the same. You're
okay?
all in your creative voice. You've been absorbing stories since you were sitting on your parents' lap and they read you a story.
True.
That creative voice knows how to do the
Yeah.
level of Stephen King and some of the other top writers. The problem is the stupid part of your brain up front here is in control. It's the parental voice.
Yeah.
And just think of the creative voice as a brilliant 2-year-old. Okay, those of you who are parents and have had 2-year-olds knows what's that like. They want to take their clothes off and run in the street, and the parental voice is saying, "No, don't do that." Okay, well, the parental voice, which is really stupid, you cannot hold story in the front part of your brain. You just can't do it. You can't hold all this stuff. So you learn the 7-point plot outline, and then you forget it. Just like you learn anything, you just forget it, and you write into the dark from the creative voice, getting the creative voice and get it out there. The key is you also, Heinlein's rule number 3, you do not rewrite. So you write, you finish what you write, you don't rewrite, put it on the market, write the next thing. It's really that simple. And I know, but Heinlein said in 1946, when he put this out in a book, he said, the reason that these rules exist is why there are so many aspirants and so few professional writers. Professional writers follow the rules, they call them his business rules. Aspirants, oh no, I know better, because they think their front brain is smarter than the little 2-year-old. Well, what we teach and what Chris and I are constantly teaching is awareness. Because once you become aware of a technique like writing into the dark, which is what most pros do, the little voice in the back says, "Oh, I have permission to do that now," and it just does it automatically. So as you learn craft, you learn all this different stuff. Then the key is, as you learn it, get it back to permission to the creative voice, and then get out of the way. You have to get this front part of your brain out of the way. The critical voice has to come out of the way. And boy, that's the difference between professional writers and beginning writers. Is beginning writers have the front part of their brain in the way. Professional writers don't care about grammar. We don't care about any of that stuff. We've learned it. We've absorbed it. Now it just comes out. And that way you can write into the dark. And so, basically find something that'll trigger you to start writing. I use titles.
I do too. I heard you say that a while back, and I almost always start a writing project with a title in mind, and that for whatever the reason, I love that you call it a trigger, because I hold that in my mind, and the story comes out of that somehow.
It gets you started. Get you into the typing, and once you're into the typing, all you have to do is write the next line. And then in the writing into the dark, there's a thing that most of us do. We call cycling.
Yeah, I call it onioning, but I think same concept.
Yeah, one of the things that and how I try to explain this is a reader goes into a story on point 1, and there's a straight line, and you get to the end, okay, and there's that straight line between the two. Well, beginning writers and early stage writers thinks, oh, I've got to write that way. And that's where they think, oh, I've got to do an outline. Oh, I've got to do all this other stuff. Oh, I've got to plan ahead. No, you don't. Because as the writer, you're the god, and this is a timeline, and you're not stuck on that timeline.
Right.
At all. And so what you can do is, what I tend to do is I go about 400 words, and then I jump out of the timeline, and I cycle back, and I go back into the timeline, and then I add stuff and fix, go through. And then I go another 300 or 400 words, and then I come back out again and cycle and see. And I'm constantly doing this as I go through my short stories or my novels. Same exact thing, 300 or 400 words. Lee Childs, on all the Reacher books, he invited, professional writers who care about having a lot of readers. This is a big myth that, that you've got to rewrite, you've got to do all that. Hemingway, even though Hemingway was a reporter, was a one draft writer, and would pound it out on a manual typewriter. he got tired of all the questions. And so he started telling people, oh, I rewrite 47 times, and oh, I do this. Well, long-term professional writers say that all the time. Remember, the title of our job is Telling Lies for Fun and Profit. Lawrence Block came up with that, and that's exactly right. And so when you're out there talking to fans, you have to tell them that you struggled or you worked on something. Or you can't just say, oh, yeah, I banged that out in about 2.5 hours. You just can't say that. You have to tell them that you struggle, because otherwise they don't spend money for your book.
Yeah.
Just logical. It has to have value in their heads because they learned all the same myths. Well, the reality of actual publishing is like what Lee Childs did. He would write 1,000 words into the dark, get to an end of 1,000 words, he'd stop for the day. And then he would start the next day and he'd read through and kind of touch up the 1,000 words and then do another 1,000 words and stop for the day. He had no outlines, no plots, no nothing. He wrote 1,000 words a day into the dark, but his cycle was 1,000 words. And he'd just do that all the way through at 1,000 words. And those are the Jack Reacher books that Lee Childs wrote. I don't know what his brother's doing now. His brother's writing, but he won't say because he's still active. Dean Koontz won't say that he's a one draft writer. He'll say, oh, I rewrite to death. I think at one point in one book, he said, oh, I write 17 drafts. And it's like, that's hooey. I mean, I've met Dean 3 or 4 times, and you have to realize that the reality doesn't match the words that writers do. Dean Koontz was as prolific as I am. Mm-hmm. And at one point he had 11 or 12 or 13 major pen names being published. You can't do that except being a one draft writer. You can't. In fact, Lee Nichols, one of his he bought all of his other pen names back. He got them all back in except for Lee Nichols. He couldn't corral Lee Nichols back in. And so every so often you'll see a book, Lee Nichols writing, Dean Koontz writing as Lee Nichols, because he couldn't control it.
Wow.
But even he now has numbers of other books out under pen names that he's very secret, has very high walls, where Stephen King couldn't protect his Brockman or whatever that was, that pen name.
Yeah.
Nora said, oh, to hell with it, because she's a romance writer. She already wrote 4 or 5 books a year. And now she's the J.D. Robb. She just said, I'll just make it public. And, these professional writers, we write, basically one draft, and we cycle, and we just cycle. And so what we're doing is we're actually rewriting as we go, but we're rewriting from the creative voice, not from the stupid front part of our brain. If you get to the end and then you go back to rewrite, you're rewriting from the stupid part of your brain because the creative voice is left down.
Right. Hope said Richard Bachman.
Bachman. That was it. Richard Bachman.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hope. I couldn't I could see it.
I couldn't get it either.
Yeah. I heard you say one time, Dean, that you keep a writing computer and your work computer separate. And
see that baby right back there? That's my writing computer. Those 2 screens there. And see that chair right there? That's my writing chair. Fiction only. There's no internet. There's no games. There's no nothing. If I sit down in that chair, I'm writing fiction.
Yeah.
And it tells my creative voice, hey, time to come play. So this is one of the best things you can do for your creative voice, is have a dedicated writing computer. Now, granted, it's in the same space. Yeah. So, if I want to research something, if I come to a point in the book and I go, oh, I need that piece of information, I stand up from the writing computer and I come over here to this computer, which is my internet computer.
Yeah.
And I research it and I write it down on a piece of paper and note, and I stand up from this and go back over to the creative voice and compare it. It makes all the difference in the world. All the difference. I always are telling people, get your own dedicated fiction computer, get all the games, get the internet off, get everything off. Everything.
Well, I used to think that I was the kind of writer that I didn't have to hold anything precious. I could just sit down and write wherever I was, and I could just go at it. And I would think that. Mm-hmm. But what I've come to find out is that when I'm intentional about my fiction writing, like you just described, when I'm intentional about it, it does flip a switch in my brain. As much as I hate to admit that, and then Christmas of this year, I got a free write typewriter
Oh
and
yeah,
some of these e-ink typewriters.
absolutely.
And it, it does nothing but type in plain text.
Mhm.
And I will sit down every morning. I write a blog post that I've been publishing over in our writing community, the Storycraft Cafe. And I write a chapter of fiction, and I could do nothing on it but write a chapter of fiction. And I hit a button and it emails over to my other computer, and I pull it into my writing software, Dabble, and I go through, and then I can I can go from the top and I can cycle back through, and then my chapter's done. And there's just as much as I hate to admit it, there's just something true about segmenting, and when you sit down to this device, it knows it's time to write. It knows that there's nothing else going on. There's no meetings I have to attend. There's no podcast I have to do. There's no editing. It's
Mhm.
just writing. And that has done more to free my creative.
Oh yeah.
uh it's just amazing. And as much as you say you can do it all, you
No,
just can't. You
no.
just can't.
One of the things that a lot of professional writers do is that they'll have, and especially if they're contained in space, what they'll do is they'll have a secondary laptop,
Yeah,
and because you can buy a cheap laptop, and
sure.
especially if you strip it down, you don't need the internet, you don't need anything. You just need a word program on it
Right.
and to write. And what they'll do is they'll close their business laptop, take their writing laptop, put it on top of that,
Right.
open their writing, and it has a different look to it. It has a different
Mhm.
feel. It has only one thing. They can't go to the internet. They can't do anything.
Right.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough to trigger the creative voice saying, "Oh, it's my time.
Right.
It's my time now." And if you're
Yeah.
trying to do it all on one thing, you're just kidding yourself. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work that way.
Right.
I know the creative voice really, really, really well, and it's the same in all of us. It's human nature on so much of this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you think you can do it differently than anybody else, Kevin Anderson records all of his stories in first, creative voice.
Yes.
Well, you know what
While
it
we're
takes.
hiking and whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what it takes. He has to be walking
Yeah.
before the creative voice clicks in and says, "Oh, my turn." And it's the same thing as a dedicated writing computer.
Right.
And so it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's that every professional writer has their own trick to get that creative voice to say, "My turn," and let them come.
Right.
And
Well,
that's
yeah, akin to that, I've also heard you talk about product versus process,
Mhm.
and especially in today's in the landscape of indie publishing, where not only are we writers, but we're publishers, and we are having to deal with the business of writing as well. Um, and I think it was at another time at 20 Books to Vegas, where you were talking, and people kept asking you questions about the business of writing, and you basically told them, no, you're confusing product with process, and you've got to get out of the publisher brain and get into the writer brain. And I'm messing up your words, what you
no,
said, but I think that's kind of the gist of what you were getting at.
yeah, you can't. Okay, now let me simply say pot kettle here.
Okay,
Okay,
right.
because for a lot of years in traditional publishing, I wrote to order. I
Yeah.
wrote media books. I was one of the top ghostwriters in New York for quite a while. I was an editor in New York off and on, for Star Trek and different things. And I wrote some of my appearances on the New York Times bestseller list are under major writer names, but I wrote their book. And that was back in the days when that was still sort of legal to do that.
Sure.
And I got paid enormous amounts of money to do it. So pot kettle. In the new world, I would never take marketing or anything to your writing computer. Never take any thoughts of, oh, fans really want this next book. I better write another one in this series. No, that's the way lies pain and death real quick.
Mhm.
You just go at it. and write what you want to write. Write what your creative voice gives you, feeds up.
Yeah.
And I have 6 or 7 series. Well, actually, I have 23 series. But some of the main ones, like that one right there, you can see that's Thunder Mountain. I have Cold Poker Gang, which is a best-selling series. It's a mystery series, things like that.
Thunder Mountain is the cowboy time travel series, isn't it?
It's time travel from modern time back into 1900
that series.
in the mining towns and stuff of the Pacific Northwest. Yes. And it's also a romance, but we won't talk about the romance part of them, but all of them are romances. And so the reality is I have a blast with that, but I haven't written a new Thunder Mountain novel in a year or so, just because it hasn't come up. And I'll write it when it comes up. I haven't written a new Cold Poker Gang for maybe a year, 2 years, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
It'll come up when it comes up.
Yeah.
Although I do have one of my short stories is going to be a novel that I wrote here in this new challenge here, in fact, in January. And I got done with it and went, oh, that's a novel, and I'm like, oh, but it's a Thunder Mountain novel. So I'm going to, if I can actually manage to do 365 short stories, which is, that's more than 90, that's more than like 10 writers put together entire careers.
Yeah.
Then next year, I'm going to fire up on a similar novel challenge, like doing a novel every 2 weeks for the whole year. And because I'll have all these novel starts from this year. And I'll have enough to do. So I'm promising my creative voice that I will come back to that and write the novel. So it's keeping my creative voice in check for, let's just make this a novel right now, which would kill the short story a day challenge.
Sure. You talked a little bit ago about the different lengths that flash fiction, then short stories, then novelettes, and novellas and novels. Some of these lengths, especially in the novel world, are really kind of arbitrary due to the publishing industry. Like the industry kind of determined that a novel would be this length. Well, now that we've kind of fudged all that, and we're electronic publishing is really where it's at, and a lot of the arbitrary things that were established because a book needed to be a certain length so that they could charge more, and all of that sort of thing.
Got that right on the money. Yep.
Well, I'm pretty sure I heard you say that, so that's how do you feel like that novels, like, what's the sweet spot these days? What
40 to 50.
Okay.
40 to 50,000 words. It makes it so that readers can read it quicker.
Okay.
And if you are producing quicker, then that the big books, the 90 to 200,000 word tomes, my wife still writes them. It's where her mind goes, especially in her like fae books and some of the fantasy that she writes. Me, I'm old. I read pulps. I read the early paperback era. It wasn't until the early 80s that a paperback, unless it was really an unusual fantasy, went anything beyond 50,000 words. They just didn't. All the paperbacks of that for the first 30 years of the paperback era were all 40, 50, and they called novels back in the pulp era, back in, that thing I showed you. They called those 20 to 30. And so readers this is readers now. And so the readers like that 40 to 50,000 word range, and it gives the authors enough room. They don't have to pad anything. I was always writing 40, 50,000 word Star Trek novels. And the publisher would go, nay, can't do that. And I would go back and add in. Basically, what I would do is I'd find a point, and I would have the characters go off on a little side venture, and they'd go off on this little side venture, and they'd do all this stuff, and then they'd come right back to the same spot they were, and then the book would continue. And it was,
just the same book all along. You just added
padding.
Tangents,
just padding. And publishers made us do that with contracts. Back in the days, I sold 106 books to traditional publishing, 106 novels, and I only have one of them. I only own one of them. I didn't own any of the others, which is kind of
Wow.
a pathetic way of going into indie publishing. I literally, when indie publishing came along, I had to start over. I had to start over. But I had a lot of fun. I wrote, Star Trek, and I wrote Men in Black, and I wrote the first X-Men novelization for the first movie, and a bunch of Spider-Man novels, and I had a blast because that's as a kid growing up and going, you mean I can write that? Yeah, you let me write that, and you're paying me? Yeah, so I was very lucky. I was very, very lucky.
How do you feel about the idea of beta readers and
it's stupid. Stupid.
And
Let me just end you right there. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
That's the stupidest thing that's come out of indie publishing is beta readers. And here's why. You're an artist. Act like one. You're not a committee member. You don't work in Hollywood in a writer's room. Okay. Act like an artist. Writing is an art form. Protect your writing. Don't let anybody else mess with it. Don't let anybody else think. My wife, Kristine Kathryn Rusch, is a Hugo Award-winning editor, as well as a Hugo Award-winning writer. She's the only person that's ever done that. Okay. And I give her my short stories or my novels first. She reads them. She finds typos. That's it. She says anything about anything else, I completely ignore it because it's my book, not hers. Start getting a backbone, people, and protect your work. You never show anybody a work in progress, ever. You only show it when it's done, and then it's to people who will buy it. If there's a mistake in it, who cares? Nobody will care. I know early writers care about, oh my God, there's a period out of place, or oh my God, the grammar's wrong. You realize that there is no person on the planet that speaks in perfect grammar, and if they do, they're really boring. I certainly don't, and neither do my characters. And someone gets in there and starts telling me how to write as like a beta reader or something. So the worst thing you can do, and the worst thing that's happened in indie publishing, and I've been fighting this since indie publishing started, is be an artist. Believe in your own work. Yes, it might be flawed. Okay, learn how to get better for your next story and your next story.
Yeah.
Because honestly, you put out a bad book, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Not a person on the planet cares. And that's freeing. That shouldn't worry you. That should be completely like, oh, I'm free. I'm free to be an artist. I'm free to write my own books. I'm free to write the stories I want to write because nobody's going to care. And who knows, a whole bunch of people might like it.
Yeah. Well, and I think we can all point to, any number of writers who have put works out and then they start getting feedback from people, and then that fear sets in, and then they can't publish anymore. It's a real thing that happens to people. And yeah.
Well, imagine if you were George Martin. Now, George has been a friend of mine for 40 years.
Yeah,
40 years, and now I feel sorry for him.
Yeah,
he's a punchline on a late night television show. That's how bad that's got. And he's never going to finish that book. All of his friends knew he was never going to finish that book.
Two books. There's two more books in that series.
Well,
And
he's overplaying in Hollywood now, and he's doing other fun stuff. And
he's doing what he wants to do.
It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
But what he's done is he's dinged all the rest of us. You can't now put out a series that has don't number your series, folks. Do not number your series, because then you'll get people going, well, I'll wait till the last one's out. That's called the George Martin effect now, because George has trained readers to go, well, it might never come out. So, finish your series, don't number them. That's a marketing hint there.
Right. Well, Dean, as we wrap up, I want to ask you this one final question. When you sit down each day to do your creative writing, not your blog posts and stuff, but when you're creating a new series, what is the first thing that comes? Like not when you're in the middle of a series, but when you have a new one to start. What's the first part of the process? You say you start with a title.
Title. I don't have any idea what I'm going to write. I don't have any ideas.
Yeah.
If I waited around for ideas, I'd be waiting around forever. I don't have any ideas. I have no theories. In fact, if I come up with something like I'm walking somewhere or, wake up in the middle of the night and I have this idea and I think, oh, what a great idea, I'll fall back to sleep. I never write anything down. My attitude is, oh, if I remember it when I get to the writing computer, then it's worth writing. Otherwise, it's not worth writing. Okay. And by the way, deanwesleysmith.com, and we have Chris and I have been doing workshops now online for, man, I think it's been 15 years. I can't believe it's been that long.
Wow.
It's built up to a lot of workshops. And that thing, Writing into the Dark, we teach that every month as a regular workshop where you turn in assignments, I read them, all of that sort of stuff. We have probably 400 to 500 classes or workshops or pop-ups or different scenarios. And we also have WMG Writer Store, which has all kinds of writer stuff on it, and it has workshops there too. And in fact, the biggest and most popular workshop we've done in a long time is about writer's block and talking about some of the things. And that's why I'm like, no, that'll kill your writing, because we're in the last session of this last couple sessions of this 18-week writer's block thing. And it has a webinar with it. It's great fun, but it's been really helping people. And the biggest point on that is treat your creative voice with respect. If you stop in the middle of a story and say, this is crap, what you're doing is you're killing your creative voice, because it knew where it was going. The stupid part of your brain up front didn't, and thought it was crap. And therefore you stopped. And what you just did is you just punished your creative voice. If you do that too much, your creative voice goes away. If you rewrite, if you go along and leave stuff blank, with the little brackets around it and like that, and say, oh, I'll fix that later, your creative voice leaves town, because it thinks, well, it's going to fix it later, so I don't need to do anything. And this is why so many people have so much trouble writing, is they listen to all those old myths about how English teachers did it, which they've never sold a word, and by and large, you don't do it that way. You write one draft, cycle, finish, and put it on the market, and then write something else. And that'll celebrate your creative voice. And don't let anybody else read it, except maybe first reader looking for typos. That's it. That's my final suggestion.
Wonderful advice, Dean. We'll link up those sites that you mentioned in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find.
And folks, don't hesitate in emailing me directly. Put my email address on there. No problem. Okay. If you've got a writing question or a business question, I really enjoy.
Excellent. I'll be sure to do that as well. Dean, at 50 years on, are you still having fun every day when you sit down at the writing computer?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 50 years since I published my first short story, or since I sold my first short story. I didn't publish until the next year, but 50 years since I sold it. And I'm still having a blast. This is the best thing you can ever do in life.
Absolutely.
And the fact that I get to make money doing it is just, that's just a dream.
Well, Dean, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show and share with us and being so generous with your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Hank. Thank you.